So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this year's Irish Academy of Management Distinguished International Scholar event. My name is Anthony MacDonald, and I'm the current chair of the Irish Academy of Management. I'm delighted that we should have a good crowd here today, and we've had over 120 registered for this year's event. And I guess maybe just to say a little bit first before I introduce you to this year's awardee and the conversation that's going to follow. But I suppose we set up this award 4 years ago to recognise leading scholars internationally across business and management. And Roy follows on from our three previous winners, Tom Coken, Helen Neergaard, and Anne Harzing. So I'm delighted that this year to announce the 2023 Irish Academy of Management Distinguished International Scholar is Professor Roy Suddaby of the Winspear Chair of Management at the Peter B. Gustavson School of Business at the University of Victoria in Canada. Roy, we do have a piece of crystal that we will hopefully give to you in person as the plan in due course in the not too distant future when we arrange that. But I'm delighted that Roy accepted our offer of this award. Roy's also the Professor of Management at the Carson College of Business at Washington State University, Liverpool University Management School in the UK, and an adjunct professor at IEA Business School in Argentina. Professor Suddaby is an internationally regarded scholar of organizational theory and institutional change, and his work, I think, has contributed heavily to our understanding of the critical role of symbolic resources, legitimacy, authenticity, identity, and history in improving an organization's competitive position. Roy is currently Associate Editor of Academy of Management Perspectives and as a past editor of Academy of Management Review, and has published widely across all of the main, I suppose, and most highly regarded international management journals. He was also recently named a JMI Scholar by the Western Academy of Management and a Fellow of the Academy of Management, and is a distinguished visiting professor at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary. So a big thank you, I guess, first of all, to Roy for agreeing to accepting the award, and ultimately in agreeing to this event where, or just similar to the previous years, where it's a conversation, I guess, and my thanks to my colleague, Professor David Collings, who's Professor of Sustainable Business at Trinity College Dublin, who's ultimately going to be speaking with Roy over the next 55 minutes. And I know there's going to be opportunity for questions and answers as well. So hopefully we'll get involved at appropriate times, and Dave will take questions at a later stage. So I'm going to pass over to Dave and Roy to commence. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Good afternoon, everyone who's in this part of the world. Good morning, Roy, who is joining us very early on his day today. So thank you. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm honored to be asked to host this discussion with Roy and talk a little bit about his work and his career, and hopefully for all of us to take away some lessons about kind of building an academic career, theory building, and institutional theory. Roy is someone whose work I came across as a student, and I've had the pleasure to get to know him over the last while as we've worked together at AMP. So I'm sure we will have a very interesting fireside conversation without a fire, is the way I'm thinking about it. So welcome, Roy, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, David. And when someone of your esteem says that you read my stuff as a student, it makes me feel very old.
Not at all, not at all. So Roy, I guess one of the things that I found out in chatting with you over the last little while is that you're not a career academic. You started life as a lawyer, which I think is really interesting. So maybe in terms of kicking off our conversation, maybe you tell us a little bit about why the change of direction.
Sure. Yeah. So I practiced corporate commercial law primarily for, almost 10 years. And I don't know if there are any other lawyers on this call, but practicing law is dead boring. I can recall one of the turning points was when so I have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, and I can recall overhearing my daughter speaking with her friend, saying, her friend asks, "What does your dad do?" And she says, "I don't know. He just talks on the telephone all day." And I thought, well, that's that's a perfect incentive to change careers. I also recall, flash forward a few years later, I'm doing my PhD. I get to work at home, hang out with my family and my son. Same question, what does your dad do? And he says in an embarrassed voice, I don't think he has a job, which is the perfect definition of a job for me. So realistically, it was a switch motivated by work-life balance issues and an effort to do something much more intellectually challenging. Not to say that practicing law helps you certainly in the management profession, because it gives you an introduction to how executives think and how corporations operate. So I don't regret that part, but quite honestly, I don't miss it at all.
It's funny how kids put stuff in perspective. Just you were talking there, I remember working at home one day with a highlighter, reading a paper, and my daughter came in and said, Daddy, will you come and play with me? You can do your coloring later. So that kind of put my work in context too for me.
That's true. That's perfect.
So yeah, for sure. I guess you get that perspective of how executives think from that background in law. How else has that kind of background influenced your research and I guess the direction of your research over the years, particularly those early years, I guess?
Yeah, it really did focus my attention on two areas that I concentrate in my research. One is, of course, the professions, because the professions are an important element of practicing law, and secondly, institutions, because as a profession, law is one of the fundamental institutions in our society, and realistically, one of the things that I really value in my work as a lawyer, and let me put this in context. My older brother is a surgeon, or as my mother likes to say, a real doctor, and the distinction between the two professions is quite profound. Physician is a scientifically determined profession, and law is a much more normative profession. And the interesting thing about management as a profession is that we occupy a space between those two worlds. Much of our research is scientifically oriented and draws from that world, but we also have the capacity to do more normative work. And the distinction is this, that science describes the world the way it is, much more objectively, and normative professions describe the world the way it ought to be. And all the conversations we're having in business schools now about the purpose of business schools is that we need to do both of those things. We need to describe what's wrong with the world, and we need to offer solutions for how to fix it. So from that point of view, the focus on or my experience as being a lawyer has really helped inform how I frame my role as a management academic.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it kind of speaks a little bit to that relevance versus rigor debate as well, right? And certainly as I talk to younger scholars, early career research, PhD students, I think that's a balance that they really struggle to find. And I guess our profession over the last number of years has become so focused on metrics and A publications and tenure that kind of impact or relevance side has very much for many taken a back seat. And I'm interested in your thoughts on how one can navigate that kind of balance effectively.
Well, yeah, I agree with your description 100%. This is the real challenge for business schools today. And I will point out that I did my MBA many years ago, back in the 1980s, when the mantra for why people came to study business was to get rich. It was the time of Wall Street was the big movie, and that Gordon Gekko phrase of greed is good was dominated the conversations. When I look at the students that are coming to business school now, it's less motivated by that sort of accumulative greed, and I think more motivated by a recognition that organizations are now seen as ways of changing the world, and that's refreshing for me. And I think management scholarship has been a little bit slow to catch up with that. So the big conversation is how can we have impact overall. And you know, I don't necessarily agree that management scholars do not have impact, but sometimes we have impact in the wrong way. So this idea of adopting a more normative perspective will help us think through what we ought to be doing in terms of our research and what sorts of impact we have. I like to see it in the context of having impact in the amongst our peers, certainly, which is the traditional metrics that you've described. But we also have impact in the classroom, and we should never forget that. We generate the new generation of leaders out there. But where we fall down a little bit, I think, is the impact in the community. And some of us do that through consulting work, but increasingly, I think that we need to engage in more community-based research where we're actually out there helping organizations to improve, yes, but you know, the work that we do also has policy implications that we should look at. And I think we have the potential to elevate marginalized communities out there, and that's the area where I think we need to put in a bit more effort.
And how optimistic are you for that future, given, you know, the priorities of our deans, of our presidents in universities, and I guess the institutionalized norms within academia?
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head, and that is, you know, so I've done much of my research on processes of institutional change, and I think in some cases, as scholars in that area, we tend to focus on those instances of institutional change that have happened relatively quickly. But the reality is that institutions change very slowly, and that was implicit in your question. Certainly the professions tend to change very slowly, and I think universities in particular change very slowly. So in answering your question, how optimistic am I think that it will require incremental steps, and this sort of change will take place over generations. Now, generations in academia are probably a little shorter than generations as we typically understand them. So I think that as we recruit new PhD students and new faculty, that's a generation, and that's realistically where the change will come.
Yeah, here's hoping. And that's probably a nice link into your own research in the institutional space, and certainly that's where I came to know your work, and I'm sure many on the call would as well. So you kind of alluded to it a little bit in terms of your background in law and stuff. So maybe, you know, if you could just kind of go back to those early days when you're thinking about institutions, because I think it's useful, particularly for some of the early career scholars and PhD students, to think about how those ideas are generated and what brought you to institutional theory, and what you saw as I guess the value of it and the opportunities in developing institutional theory. A lot of questions in there, but
yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'm going to meander to a little bit to contextualize this by saying that my ambition in entering academia was never to have the level of career that I actually have had. My wife and I got married here in Victoria while I was doing my master's degree in Vancouver, and we always said that we would come back here someday. So in getting my PhD, which I got at the University of Alberta, a couple of provinces over, was to get a job in a teaching college in Victoria at the time. As it turned out, when I entered my PhD program, the focus on institutions, as most of you will know, was how they don't change, that institutions reproduce themselves over time through these processes of mimetic isomorphism. And from my context, that just simply didn't ring true. The legal profession was changing rapidly at the time. In fact, the big danger competitively for law firms was that accounting firms were going out and buying up law firms and transforming them into sort of global operations. So because I didn't have high career aspirations, I took risks on my PhD. I said, I'm going to do a dissertation that examines how institutions change. And my supervisor quite wisely told me, well, you probably not get a great job doing that. And I said, that's okay. I'm going to go to a community college on Vancouver Island and I'll be okay. So I put my head down and conducted my research and wrote the dissertation. And lo and behold, when I re-entered the world out of my dissertation, everybody was talking about institutional change at the time. So I did manage to publish well on that as a PhD student, and my career took a different direction. The bit of learning that I would take from that is to take some risks in your career and again for the early career researchers out there, the advantage that you have compared to the situation that I'm in now is that you're still very close to your empirical context, and as a result, you actually have data that can demonstrate and defy existing knowledge that we might have out there. And there is tremendous pressure, institutional pressure within our profession to conform and to write papers that enter an existing conversation. But if I can give any advice, and it's risky, I will admit, is that you should try and change the conversation, particularly if you have the data to support it. So I'm quite glad that I did that. But now institutional theory is all about institutional change. Maybe the pendulum has swung too far that way, but I'm glad I took the risk.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think sometimes as in early careers and as PhD students, we're so focused on the end point that we end up very narrowly defining our research and not taking risks. And frankly, reading some of the top journals, what gets published, a lot of the interesting stuff is sanitized out of too. And even where there is some risky elements of papers, reviewers manage to weed them out and kill all the interesting stuff, right?
That's so true. And I mean, this is perhaps a different conversation, but it is very, very difficult in our profession to change the conversation. You certainly, as you pointed out, you certainly can't do it at the top journals. This whole point about entering an existing conversation is to encourage you not to defy the extant knowledge that exists out there. So you often have to use the other tools that we have. Sometimes you start with book chapters or lower level journals and build the conversation forward. I've with colleagues, it's been very, very difficult to introduce history as a subject area in institutions, which again surprises me a little bit because history and institutions you would think would go together. But with colleagues, I've been working on this area for roughly 10 years now. And again, lo and behold, the last academy in Boston, there were several sessions on history and institutions, many of them packed with 200-300 participants at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I think that time has arrived, but it doesn't happen overnight. It's a very slow process that requires a lot of institutional work behind the scenes.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point about kind of challenging conversations in the top journals, and certainly that's been my experience as well, working in the early stages of areas that you kind of sometimes need to go down the rankings to get traction for areas. And again, for an early career researcher, that's not an easy thing to do because so many of those heuristics that selection panels use are around the journals and the ranking as opposed to the ideas. So it really is a delicate balance for early career researchers.
It is, and I would encourage, there is a sequence or a hierarchy that you can do this, but the real mechanism for change is organizing special issues. Special issues can influence change, even at the top journals.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thought I had as you were speaking, I read a reflection by Angelo Denisi around his career today, and he was talking about the difference between PSYOP and academy management as a forum for ideas. So I guess, obviously your work would overlap a lot with areas like sociology or history, as you say. Have you kind of dipped your toe in some of those kind of disciplines as well, and published in or gone to those conferences, and how has that kind of supplemented or worked with the mainstream kind of more management outlets and opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me back up and say that one of the benefits of getting my PhD in Canada is that we occupy this sort of interstitial space between Europe and the United States, and they are two very, very different worlds in the context of management academics. For example, on the issue of history, it is quite acceptable for management history to enter into top journals in Europe, whereas it's been an incredible struggle on the North American side. So that positioning between Europe and the United States has been quite beneficial by accident, I would add, for my career. But your point about taking a much more interdisciplinary approach is absolutely critical. And so one of the benefits that I had at the doing my PhD at the University of Alberta was that we had primarily European trained or UK trained supervisors available. So I completed my PhD with Royston Greenwood and Bob Heinings, both trained in the Aston tradition, which was quite different from what most business schools were doing in North America at the time. Qualitative research, longitudinal research. This was not my experience in my interactions with American scholars. But that was incredibly helpful. And one of the requirements was that we did an equivalent number of preparatory courses in sociology. So my background training is largely in sociology. But this is a piece of advice that I would give again to any early career researchers, is to dip your toe into other disciplinary areas. My hero in this regard is Jim March, who is really was a Renaissance person. He advised me, and I met him while a PhD student at a conference, and he advised me to do all sorts of interesting things. One was to attend lectures outside of my discipline at the university, which I think was critical. The other piece of advice that he told me was to draw from literature as a source of ideas for new research. And so my first job was at the University of Iowa, which was a very traditional American school, very quantitatively oriented. But one of the beautiful things about the University of Iowa is that the university itself was not famous for its medical program or its science program. It was actually famous for something called the Iowa Writers' Workshop. And the Iowa Writers' Workshop attracted fiction writers primarily from all over the world, particularly from Hollywood and places like that. And part of the program was this interdisciplinary institute called POROI, the Project on the Rhetoric of Inquiry. And it brought together all sorts of academics from all around the university, scientists, humanities, to talk about the role of language and rhetoric in shaping institutions. And it was transformative for me. Prior to that, I didn't have the language to understand how institutions changed, but it really helped frame my dissertation research around the role of rhetoric as a precursor to institutional change. Absolutely transformative. But it does speak to your broader point about being multidisciplinary. And it also speaks back to this point of business research being a syncretic profession, that we need to both describe the world the way it is, objectively, scientifically, but integrate into that a normative approach of the way the world ought to be.
Yeah, that's a challenging ambition, isn't it? Right? When you think about, and I agree with everything, right? But when you think about as you start out in your career and you're trying to craft this career, and the expectations we put on academics, but in an ideal world, wow, they're all the things we should be thinking about, right?
That's true. And the piece of advice I give to my students is you can never do this all in one dissertation. You can't do it in one paper. It is a project, and fortunately, careers are long, so you have tremendous opportunities to do it. But incremental change is always the best approach in a highly institutionalized field.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe from there, Roy, we'll think a little bit about theory building, because I think certainly one of I guess the things that I certainly would think about when I think about your work is the extent to which you've developed theory, written theory, the theoretical side of it is a real strength. And that's the bit we're often most scared about, right? Because when we want to do quants, there's a template. It's obviously different templates in qual. There's no boilerplate or whatever, but the theory bit is the bit that's really scares people. So based on kind of, I guess, your research, particularly if we just focus on the institutional stuff, what are your key lessons around building theory, around theory development, and how we as scholars should think about it and go about it?
Yeah, again, my advice is going to go back to the mantra I always say is you have to take risks with theory. One of the problems that we have, I think this is less a problem in Europe than it is in North America, but it's the way that we teach things in a very sort of static, taken for granted way. So for example, the way that we tend to teach science in North America, at least, is to have students study the periodic table of the elements. And when you do that, and you teach it in that sort of objective scientific way, it doesn't leave space for new contributions by junior scholars or by scholars of any age, I suppose. Whereas if you look at the way that most of the sort of Nobel Prize winners in chemistry were taught, they tend to teach science not in that objective way, but in a progressive historical way. So and so invented this, so and so invented that, and that opens the opportunity for you to position yourself to participate in that conversation. Unfortunately, we do the same thing with theory. What we do is we say, these are the theories. You study these theories and see how you can fit into these theories. And as a result, we view the theory as a constraint rather than an enabler. Theory should be generative. And if we taught organizational theory, for example, in a historical perspective, I think then it would be easier for junior scholars and early career researchers to say, I see the progression and I see that I can make a contribution here. But theory is a tool. It's quite generative. And one of the debates in the academy that bothers me so much is this idea that we have too much theory and that we need to have more empirics. That's just wrong-minded, I think. And one of the things you will observe is that when for example, the Academy of Management creates these new journals that are supposed to be empirically based without much theory. There is an inevitable incremental increase in the amount of theory that takes place in these journals. Why? Because you cannot have data without theory. I mean, it's almost impossible. It's this idea that there are some objective facts out there that exist without a theoretical context. Theory inevitably creeps in, and it creeps in for a whole range of reasons, but fundamentally because good theory is generative. It allows us to define a path forward to discover new facts. So my big takeaway on this is that we need to have a more inclusive approach to how we teach theory, so that the junior scholars can see that it's not an iron cage that constrains you, but it's a generative tool that can help you.
That's a super interesting perspective and way to think about it. And I guess, thinking about your own work and obviously your time at AMR as an editor, beyond the teaching in terms of the theory development process, what are the kind of the typical mistakes that what are the things that people get wrong in their own theory building?
Yeah, well, there's lots of mistakes that people get wrong. One of the biggest mistakes is that people try to mash together too many theoretical arguments in one context, and that isn't helpful. There is an opportunity to blend theories together, but you shouldn't have too many points, too many moving parts, I guess, in an argument. The other element I would say about theory is that there is the micro foundations of theory are, of course, the constructs, and the way to change a conversation in theory is to introduce a new construct. And again, don't introduce 10 new constructs into a theoretical argument, but identifying a new construct and working it into an extant theory is far and away the easiest way to change theories. And sometimes as a result of that progress, the theory sort of loses its coherence over time, and that's okay. Theories do have an expiry date. I'll give you examples of that. So when I started my PhD, you could not publish in Administrative Science Quarterly unless you did population ecology. It was just that was the thing. Where is population ecology today? I don't think it's anywhere. The theory has been abandoned. I think that institutional theory is threatened by the same degree of exhaustion. It started out with institutional isomorphism, and then institutional change, and then institutional work, and eventually institutional entrepreneurship, institutional work. When it becomes an adjective like that, the theory has it's threatened with the problem of being stretched too thin and losing its core coherence. I don't think it's quite happened to institutional theory yet. I think there is an opportunity for a renaissance there, but it's absolutely okay for theories to change over time, and it's absolutely okay for theories to be abandoned in favor of other theories. That is the generative aspect of theories. This goes all the way back to Thomas Kuhn, who says that the role of theory is to create these paradigms or these circles of conversation of academics talking about the same things. But going back to my original point, constructs are the primary glue that holds all that together.
Yeah. And it's amazing how many, and we all do it, it's amazing how many of us kind of underestimate the importance of even defining critical constructs in papers. As authors, we get it back in reviews, something we take for granted and just don't call out and don't define or give an example of rather than define. So I think you're so right. It's I often talk to students in terms of like the constructs being the boxes in your theory, in your framework, but the arrows are the narrative, and the arrows are the theory and the important bit, right?
Yeah. And you had a good point, is that we should not underestimate the narrative elements of theory as well. Critically important. And it's something that's harder to teach than constructs.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go there with your story about your time in Iowa, but I think that kind of element of storytelling in writing articles and writing theory, I think, is an art that's probably underestimated. The value of good writing,
Yes.
beyond the actual content.
It absolutely is, and you know, in selecting students to work with, there are tremendous numbers of very, very smart students out there, but the ability to craft a story is unique. And we do, as a profession, we do a lot of things really, really well. We teach people how to do research methods incredibly well. I think we still do a pretty good job on teaching them theory, but we do not teach people how to write. And it's shocking to me because writing papers is the currency of the profession, and if we don't, and there's no question that writing can be taught. The folks at the University of Iowa, they teach people how to write fiction. They're very, very good at it, and surprisingly, it's not much different from the way that we do it as a profession. It's a group of people sitting around a table once a week criticizing a paper, basically. That's really all it is. But we need to develop better mechanisms of training our students and our early career scholars how to write narratives.
Yeah. I half jokingly say that Stephen King taught me how to write, because as a teenager I read all these books, and I actually have a Stephen King book on my shelf here called On Writing, which is
Yeah.
his book about teaching people how to write. And you know, it's a skill, right? It's an art.
I know that book well, and the thing that I love about King's career is that he got rejected so many times, and he persisted, and one of the skills that again our PhD students have to understand is you know, we pour so much of ourselves into our papers. You know, you've worked on this paper for 2 years and it gets rejected. We have to distance ourselves from our work a little bit and say, it's not you personally that's getting rejected, it's this paper, and you need to just revise that paper and go back to the well and try again. And I recall he opens that book by describing, you know, he was writing and he had his rejection slips stuck on a nail in the wall, and he had hundreds of them. And that's part of the game.
Yeah, yeah. You made a point earlier that you couldn't publish, that one couldn't publish an ASQ without a particular theory in a point in time. For most of us, one can't publish an ASQ, period. So those rejections, I think, are very common to us all. I have one more question for now, and then we may open it up to the floor for some questions, because I'm anxious to ensure that people have time to ask some questions. So and we didn't talk, so when we talked, we didn't talk about this, but just as you were reflecting, it came to mind. Have you any thoughts on the potential impact of artificial intelligence on whether it be theory building or publishing more general? There's a lot of kind of noise about it right now. I don't think anybody has all the answers, but I know many of us are thinking about it and what it means for what we do. And I'm just interested to know if you've began to think about it or have any thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think about it a lot, actually, and I have played around with ChatGPT on my own for a variety of reasons. I'll give you 2 examples where I was very, very impressed with it. One of the exercises I have in my role here as an Associate Dean of Research is to try and organize my people into interdisciplinary clusters. And I did it the traditional grounded theory way, where I looked at and coded and all that. And then I got ChatGPT to do it. And it came up with more or less the same clusters, but it identified some that I didn't have myself. And I thought this is interesting, because one of the things that we're trained to do as qualitative researchers is to be reflexive about our blind spots. And I clearly wasn't as reflective as I ought to have been, and it made me think, what are the blind spots of AI? It must at a meta level absorb the cultural blind spots of the material that it relies on to do this. And so it occurred to me that it would be a great study for someone with more energy than I have, to conduct a series of experiments with ChatGPT to identify its cultural determined blind spots. My understanding of it, and again, I'm no expert on this, is that you can do a sensitivity analysis on ChatGPT by asking it the same question in slightly different ways, and it generates different outcomes. So that part of it I'm absolutely fascinated by. The second element that I really like, or I don't know if I'm a little bit more afraid of it, is its ability to actually write papers, and it writes in such an authoritative voice. It's incredible, and again, I'm starting to use that as a tool for my PhD students to teach them how to write. We as academics, we tend to hedge our bets. We tend to say things very tentatively and cautiously, and I think maybe we could be a little bit more direct and blunt and claim our space the way ChatGPT does. So I see it as a valuable writing tool. Am I worried that it will take over our profession? Not so much yet. I mean, I don't know it particularly well, but one of the things that and I'm reaching back to my time at the University of Iowa as well, is we should not underestimate the degree of human creativity that exists out there. And if you look at the genre of a typical screenplay, for example, it's very well defined. It's about 80 pages. There's a certain narrative arc. You have to hit the crisis about 2/3 of the way through. It's all very structured, and ChatGPT could probably do this very, very effectively. But in spite of all of that structure and formulaic elements of it, every time someone will come up with something incredibly new that creates an act of human ingenuity or creative genius, I guess. Is AI capable of that? I'm not sure. I don't know. But I have a lot of faith in human creativity. So far, I see it as a tool. I see it as a very effective tool that should improve us all. And I will point out, I'm old enough to remember when, and I know these are not comparables, but when computerized spreadsheets came out, and I should back up and say I used to teach in the accounting side and in the strategy side. When these computerized spreadsheets came out, everyone said this is the end of accounting, and that's not true. It's just another tool for accountants. It makes their job easier. I think humans adapt to these sort of technological affordances over time, and I'm pretty sure we will. It will take some time, but am I afraid of it? No, not particularly.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
I was going to say the concern is also on teaching, and I think this is a good thing. It means that we'll have to actually talk to our students in the Socratic method as we used to, rather than just have them fill out forms.
Yeah, for sure. Very good. My lighting has become very moody because the main light turned off because the switch is over there. So I'm now moody here in the lighting. So maybe we'll turn over to the floor for a little while and see if we've any questions or comments from the floor. If you just raise your hand, we'll try and manage it a little bit. Give people a second to find how to raise their hands. Everyone's very shy at the moment.
Let me say, you can ask me anything, not even about academia. I have this practice with my children, who they know that I can speak about anything, even stuff I don't know about. So at the dinner table, they'll ask me a question, and as soon as I start to answer, they'll feign falling asleep. So there you go.
Okay, well, we'll leave that option open. So if anyone does decide to come. Yep. Hi, Felicity.
Can you hear me? Hi.
I can, yeah.
Sorry about that, Dave. There's a question in the chat, so I'll just read it. It's Antu. Such a great conversation. I have a question that is hopefully related to what Professor Roy was talking about. Do you think AI will ever be capable of introducing a new construct of its own?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, Antu. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, constructs are the creation of constructs is not a particularly difficult thing, and I think that there are mechanisms for creating new constructs that have existed way back when. So again, one of the devices that I use when I'm teaching my PhD students is to look at Grimus's semiotic square. Grimus was, I think, a Finnish-American philosopher or a linguist, I guess. But he had this idea of putting a term, let's say male, at the top corner of a square, and then the opposite of it, female, and then he would describe adjacent elements of it, and use that mechanism as a tool of generating new constructs. And I use this when I teach my students how to generate terms that exist around the margins of existing constructs. I think that we could very easily ask ChatGPT or any form of AI to do that, and I think that they would be incredibly creative at generating that. And we need to remember that the constructs are based on nuances of meaning that capture reality in different ways. Can this be automated? Absolutely, it could. It would make our lives a lot easier. I haven't actually tried to use that with ChatGPT yet, but thank you for the question, because as soon as I get off this call, I'm gonna give it a shot. I hope that answered your question, but feel free to follow up with another one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roy. There is another question in the chat. So this is from Kaylee Baker. Great conversation. Do you have any advice for first-year PhD students getting started with theory?
Yeah, a great question, Kaylee. My advice always to PhD students is with respect to theoretical framing and in terms of empirical context, do something that's meaningful to you. Pick something that resonates with you. So in my context, institutional theory resonated with me because of my interest in professions and I have to back up a little bit and say that I think academics study things that they're not good at, and so I study change because I don't like change very much. So if you have that understanding of yourself, then pick a theory that matches or that resonates with what it is that really motivates you, and that's important because this is not a sprint. Careers are very long, and you need to keep engaged in something that's interesting to you for a long time. So it should be something personally meaningful to you.
Great, thank you, Roy. I'm only acting as conduit here. So
you actually checked the chat, which was a whole lot more than I did. So well done.
Yeah. Margaret gave me a job, Roy. So here, I'll put the camera on to say hello properly. How are you? So Andrew, thanks you for your response. And Neil Dunn, again, a great conversation and an honor to spend time with you. Can you ask what research problems are currently occupying your time?
Oh, now you can all fall asleep because I'll go on for hours. I'm currently interested in, so I'm starting to do some research that has impact in the communities, and the community that I'm particularly interested in Canada is the Indigenous community, and most people have this vision of Canada that is based on the large urban centers. But when you go north of the 60th parallel in Canada, it is like going to a third world country. There are no roads there. There is no internet as we understand it, sometimes not even any cellular coverage. And the Indigenous people live on First Nations in appalling conditions. One of the elements of this is healthcare for Indigenous people. They tend to suffer from diabetes a lot. And diabetes, I was always thought, or I was always told, was that the Indigenous population was genetically predisposed to get diabetes. Absolutely false. Scientifically, just not true. Diabetes is a form of slow violence. It is an expression of institutional violence that takes place over generations, and it's caused by lack of access to good food, incredible amounts of stress, part of being a marginalized population. So what I'm currently focused on is the role of events in combating institutional slow violence. The problem with slow violence is that when it occurs incrementally over multiple generations, it's hard to identify a cause. So when violence occurs quickly, we can mobilize and respond to it almost immediately. Chernobyl happens, we mobilize and we fix it up. A war event happens, we can resolve that. But slow violence like climate change or pollution or poor health conditions that occur intergenerationally, we can't fix it because we don't have the mechanisms to understand the causal connections to it. But some folks are really good at organizing events that draw attention to slow violence and mobilize against it. So, for example, Mahatma Gandhi organized responses to the slow violence of colonialism through his salt exercises or the spinning wheel, trying to have folks not ship their cotton to Britain and have it sent back or have them buy clothing from Manchester. But instead to spin clothing in the traditional way at home. Those sorts of events drew attention and actually mobilized institutional change out there. So that's what another example would be the Rosa Parks incident, which was highly organized. There's a lot of institutional work that went into that particular event. But my current work is looking at how we construct events, historical events, to combat slow violence. I could go on, but I won't. I hope that answers your question, though.
That's great, thank you. There's a number of other questions here, so I'm going to fish through them because I'm conscious of your time as well.
Sure.
So the next question here is from Sid MacDonald. With reference to taking risks with theory, have you any practical advice for making the leap to create theory from data in qualitative research?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I have any advice other than to start to develop your sort of creative or sensitivity skills to stimulating creative imagination. I'll give you an example of this. So when I was a reviewer on a paper in Academy of Management Journal early in my career. And you know the boilerplate description that we have about how we came to reviewing our qualitative data and then came up with the constructs. And now we've really rationalized it with Gioia charts and all these sort of things. This author said, I went to sleep, I reviewed all the data, I went to sleep, I had a dream, and I came up with the construct and put that in her description of how she generated a new construct, a new theory. And I thought that was really an honest answer, because I do know people that do that. Unfortunately, we like our work to be very sciencey. Even the qualitative research has to be sciencey. So this idea of taking the leap, I think, is that we need to develop mechanisms that allow us to make that creative leap. For me, the description that I used of the Grimus semiotic square is very, very helpful for me. It may not be helpful for you, but you have to play around with constructs. You have to play around with ideas to be generative. David had mentioned the importance of multidisciplinary access or engaging with other conversations outside of management as a way of stimulating that. And I think that's also a very, very helpful tool that I've used as well. But you have to find the one that's right for you. Whatever works, you'll recognize it once you do it. But it does mean that you need to get outside your office or outside your existing circle of colleagues and start talking to other people. I hope that answered the question.
Super. I'm going to jump back in there, Roy. Thanks, Felicity, for picking up on some of those questions. I'm conscious of time and we're conscious of finishing on time. So I'm going to come back in. Roy, that was a fascinating conversation. I'm going to leave you with one last question, but that was a fascinating conversation. And thank you so much for your thoughts. I certainly took a lot of notes and some real interesting things to reflect on in the context of your work and your career. And I think, as scholars, lots of great takeaways for us. I think I pick up an optimistic tone for the future of our profession from you. So maybe as a last question, are you optimistic for the future of business and management academia? What would you kind of set out as what our ambition should be as a broad field of scholars?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm optimistic. I think that, and it goes back to this point of us occupying this interstitial space between true science and normative ways of theorizing that puts us in this unique position. One of the beautiful things about business and management and organizations is that we live in an organizational world now. The knowledge that we have is fundamental to initiating any kind of change that exists out there, including issues around entrepreneurship and creativity. One of the big illusions that I think we have is this notion of the individual genius tinkering away in their garage that comes up with these great ideas. That may well be the case in some instances, but in order for those ideas to have any impact on the world, it will take an organization and it will take someone with some degree of knowledge about business and institutions to make it happen. So we are probably best positioned of any of our colleagues across campus to actually have an impact on the world. And I think that is the future of management as an academic discipline, and I think fantastic things are going to happen. I will add that one of the things that some of the large funding agencies in Canada are starting to do, which recognizes this, is that even on these magnificently large science grants, they insist on having a managerial component to it. Management of the research grant itself, but also to help the scientists think about the implications of whatever discovery that they have for application to the real world. And I think that's a terrific idea. I think it's something that should be instituted in all of the science grants that exist out there. But that's an element of, or a short illustration of the potential impact that we could have.
Well, I think that's a really positive message to finish on. So thank you, Roy. Congratulations. We're honored to have you as the recipient of our Distinguished Scholar Award for 2023. I look forward to having the opportunity to present it to you in person and toast it with a pint of Guinness or other suitable equivalent drink. We've come up to 4 o'clock. I'm conscious of everyone's time. Thank you everyone for joining us. We have recorded this and it will be available on the website if you want to come back over anything we've discussed. Thank you again, Roy, and congratulations. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for the questions as well. Fantastic.
Absolutely. Thanks, Roy.